demographic situation in the Western world is dire. Everywhere, former white majorities are being flooded with non-white immigration and are becoming racial minorities in their own countries. Much of this has, of course, come under the guise of celebrating diversity and championing minority rights. Thus, some people have begun to argue that white communities should also begin to claim special minority status to secure at least some legal recognition and protect themselves from further desolation. I, however, think this approach is totally doomed and entirely fails to understand why we are in the position we are in. Watch this to understand why. Now, I suppose for a little bit of context on why I'm talking about this, a couple of weeks ago I was at the First Fleet Forum, an event run by Shieldings, who are the same people who run the Witan in the UK. Now, the event went rather well, the speeches were very good, and it was an excellent chance to meet a bunch of very intelligent people. However, the closing speech stood out in particular as it argued for a legalistic framework under which the white settler Australians, those of, chiefly British and Irish stock, could claim minority status in Australia as a distinct ethnic group. Naturally, this speech was the most controversial of the event, and for good reason. My position is that I am near totally opposed to what was put forward in that speech on many fronts. But I suppose to properly break down why I disagree with the thesis of the speech, I should first say why we are in the position we are in, why the legalistic approach will not work, and maybe give a hint of what can work instead. Now, I appreciate that in forwarding my position, there is a lot of prerequisite theory that I can't and don't expect the average person to understand. However, a lot of this theory is explained in previous videos of mine, which I point to on screen now. I suppose I probably ought to give some sort of a outline of what my argument is before going further in depth. The first thing to say is that I believe the countries of the Western world to be unofficial vassals of an unofficial global American empire, an empire which is run chiefly by two factions, the Zionist/neocon faction, or in general the diaspora of the chosen people, and also a techno-globalist/neoliberal faction. These factions are distinct, but they do have a lot of overlap, which is why they can get on so harmoniously. And then the second thing to understand is that every faction throughout history, the ones that haven't been completely idiotic, only really act in their best interests, and they don't, as some might assume, act ideologically, they don't act according to moral principles or anything else like that. In effect, factions act according to their own interests, and it's their interests that come first, not ideology, not emotion, not any of that. Then one has to realise that, the modern world is so back to front, so upside down, that the interests of the ruling elites, unlike in, your typical feudal system, where the power of the aristocrats come from the land and from the people, no, in modernity, the interests of the elites pretty much come at the expense of the people, and the elite faction, the merchant faction, wants to secure all the power for itself and totally disempower everyone else, except for perhaps their own clerical class, the propagandists. And so, yes, the various regimes of the West are incentivized against their own people, and they don't have their people's interests at heart, but purely their own interests at heart. And so, yes, that's what we have. We have a situation where the elites are against the people. They are chiefly of a chosen people diaspora coalition with techno-globalists, ultra-capitalists, what have you. And these people want to do all they can to prevent any other faction from rising to power and toppling their regime. This gets us to the first reason why I think that mass immigration is being done to us, which is that it's a deliberate attempt to weaken the competing nations. Traditionally, you take this from the view that, America is the empire, the imperial center, and it wants to make sure that the vassals can't rise up against itself. And, potentially you could say that there are threats from outside, threats from Russia, threats from China, Yet, in response to this, we do see that the peripheries of the empire are permitted more nationalism, such as, most famously, Poland is permitted nationalism, and I think even Australia fits into this to a large extent. But for, the rest of Europe and for Canada, these are civilizations that, historically have been able to stand up against America and, previously historically dominated America. Of course, we were the genesis of America, but we are, in some regard, a threat to America, or at least we could grow into being a threat to America. And so there has been a deliberate effort to completely disempower our nations such that we could never rise against the American imperial center. Now, I've talked about this in my video about architected decline, and I highly recommend you watch that if you haven't already. But this is one explanation that historically would have been true of many empires. Empires do want to keep their vassals, tame and in line and never rise to exceeding them in power. Otherwise, you'll have a situation like in the Holy Roman Empire where the Prussians take, the lead position among the German peoples. But whilst that applies to a conventional imperial analysis, one must also reckon with the fact that even within America, and especially within America, the white people there are also being subjected to the mass immigration, the architected decline, the disempowerment, and all of the typical things like that. So actually, I don't think you can consider it in a sense of, it's America versus the vassals. Really, I'd say it's a few or a couple ruling factions within America and within its vassals against the disorganized masses within the global American empire. It's the American elites against the American people, and it's the American elites against every other nation in the world, but specifically the global American empire. Then, of course, you have another theory, which I think, arguably has some merit to it, and I made a video about this before myself as well, which is the idea that this is a, chosen people diaspora and Zionism project against the traditional peoples who kicked out those certain chosen people various times across history. I've made the argument that once these people realize what the chosen lot are doing to them, then it's only natural that they will want to exile the chosen lot, or worse. And so the chosen lot want to disempower these people, contain them, trick them, whatever else have you, such that they never shall again be a threat to the chosen people. And then along the lines of weakening the native Europeans and the, settler colonial Europeans, you have this effort of what's called bio-Leninism, which is where you privilege people who are undeserving of a certain position, and you raise them up to the certain position, knowing that they don't deserve it, and they know that they don't deserve it, but with the idea that you have elevated them unnaturally beyond their station. Their loyalty thus is to you, because if your regime topples, they will inevitably go back down to where they belong. And this is true of mass immigration. I believe these people know and understand that they don't rightfully have a place in our countries, yet they are permitted to leech off of our wealth and take our jobs for lower wages and do all of these things because of a, they perceive it to be a soft and gullible regime. I perceive it to be a, cynical and, totally incentivized against ourselves. These people are allowed in and allowed to be, given these positions and given so much money from the state. They are clients of the state. They are allowed this unnaturally, they know it, and thus their loyalty will always ultimately lie with the state that is providing them with these resources, with this wealth. And of course, one shouldn't fail to mention that having mass immigration can depress wages, which can increase, profitability of various big corporations. And I do believe that, big corporations are the bulk interest of the ruling regime, especially the techno-globalist faction, but also a lot of the Zionist and neoconservative diaspora, that faction, because these people, have a lot of vested financial interest and financial power. And now it's important to address the issue of why I don't think it will work for white people to, take the position of these minorities, to argue that they should also be elevated by the state, to a certain level, because they too are now a, minority on paper. The first thing to say on this is that, yes, in theory, the argument is professed by, usually left-wing people that having these minorities and allowing them in is all about, loving diversity, protecting minorities, enriching the culture, whatever have you. But I don't think that anyone at the actual top of, the pyramid of power genuinely believes in this. Beyond a doubt, the middling elites and, some of the useful idiots near the top probably do believe in this, but I think the people at the top are cynical enough to understand what's in their interest, and I don't think they are ideological at all. Thus, whilst you may be able to convince a useful idiot in the middle rungs of the elite that white people can also be minorities and thus be deserving of minority rights, you can't convince people of that on an ideological framework who never believed it on an ideological level in the first place and were only spouting the ideology as a political formula of, BS, therefore we pursue this, that and the other. And, we've seen this before. We've seen in Rhodesia and South Africa, you had minority white settler groups, including of the Boers who've been there for longer even than some of the black groups who've been there. They are minorities, they are white minorities, yet the ideological framework used against them is not that of diversity and, loving minorities, it's that of colonialism. So you see how it's not actually about the numbers, it's not about minorities, it's just about anti-white policy because the incentives are against the white people. The other thing to mention is that, all these minority groups in a bio-Leninist faction are client groups of the state, which acts as the patron. But the reason why whites can't also become client groups is because you simply cannot have a country where there are only client groups, forming in the whole country. You need to have a non-client group which, creates the wealth, which works the jobs, which, you need to have your tax base. You need to have your people who just want to grill, who, support the regime, who join up to the military, who, the area which Scrump and Evelyn describe as the conservative given. You need your white people to do that and to fill that role of the imperial tax base. And you simply can't have it where every group is going to become a client group minority, because the nation would go bankrupt before anyone had a second chance to change things. So no, you can't have in a traditional white country whites becoming as much of a client group as Pakistanis, Indians, Chinese, or whatever else have you. The system simply can't handle it. But, if by some miracle this could all work, and you could have a situation where every group is a client group, there is, of course, again, the simple issue of, if you believe that the regime is deliberately doing this against us, then, for what reason would they cave in to our demands to become, a recognised minority group with special privileges and rights? Legalism and constitutions, in my opinion, and I've done videos about this before, I've done, why constitutions are nonsense, I've done why law isn't real. Legalism without true power to back it up, it's just not worth anything. It's trying to persuade people who know that it's in their best interest not to agree with you, trying to persuade them to agree with you. If you don't have any way to blackmail them, to coerce them, to force them, or anything else like that, then by what means are you actually going to get your way? And that's a trick question, because you can't get your way and you won't get your way. Legalism and law and international law gets violated and contravened, and there's loopholes in so many cases, so many ways, that the only reasonable conclusion is that law is just complete bollocks, and something else is at play that is guiding the law. Beyond, pragmatism, there's nothing at all forcing the regime to give in to legalistic demands, especially not as laws can be changed and misinterpreted and reinterpreted and whatever else have you. There's just no avenue for it. Instead, without the true power to back it up, this legalistic argument is little more than the whimpering of a beaten dog begging to be considered equal to, the Johnny-come-lately Pakistani or Indian. Okay, there could be the argument made that arguing for minority rights once your people have become a minority is, a reasonably convincing rallying cry for the people, something they can aim towards. We deserve to be at least treated equal to these other groups who are minorities because we are a minority. However, okay, I do think there is some merit to this line of thinking that this, we can create some propagandistic battle cry, some BSBS, therefore we should have power sort of thing. But even on this, I think there are so many better ways to do it. Of course, it's easier in Europe because we are the native peoples in our own land. But even in settler colonies, you can say the settler colonialists and their descendants have a legitimate claim to the land. That there's an ethnogenesis, that whatever else you want to come up with, that's much stronger than trying to beg to become a recognized minority group. Because, okay, you can change an ideology down the line, but in the moment, as your rallying cry, if you're legalistically arguing to become a minority, then you are tacitly accepting that minorities should have rights within your country. Whereas I suspect that most people on the true right don't particularly want minorities to forever have rights to remain in our countries. We want them gone. We want our countries back. We want, to be the masters of our own destiny, rather than living in this defeated multicultural rainbow world and being grateful that we've at least got that. So no, I don't think we should use the ideological frame of our enemies to recuperate at least some rallying cry for our own people. I think we should, if we're going to have a rallying cry or some sort of propaganda like that, it should be something much stronger, something much more definitive. Like, we want to succeed as a group. We want our people to be masters of this country. We should be the majority. We should be the ones in total power. We shouldn't have to share our country with people who've only turned up in the last 50 years. And so, yes, I think I've made my point. Those are my chief disagreements with the speech that was given at the First Fleet Forum. No hard feelings against the person who made that speech. And if the person, I'm not saying their name because I don't know if they want their name out there. But if the person does want to debate, I'm happy to do so. I hope that, it's understood that I've made this video in good faith. But yeah, those are my disagreements. Please let me know what you think. And yes, do all the other stuff, like the video, subscribe, comment, join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, whatever else have you. It was a great time to be in Australia, so I'm very grateful to the organisers for having me. And yes, thank you all for watching, and cheerio.